Hey everybody, and welcome to the Phunky Diabetic podcast with your host, Kate Tassie. The purpose of this podcast is to share the struggles, achievements, insights, and opinions of diabetics, their loved ones, and the medical professionals that provide them guidance and treatment. These episodes will feature stories that will inspire, dissuade, entertain, and educate. My hope is that with each episode, it will leave you with some degree of comfort, camaraderie, or empathy, whether or not diabetes has ever touched your life in any way thus far. You should know that none of the statements made within this podcast should be construed as medical or legal advice in any way. Any changes made to your diet or diabetes management should be made only after consulting with a medical professional. Now, without further ado, please enjoy the Phunky Diabetic podcast. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Phunky Diabetic podcast. I'm your host, Kate Tassie, and today my guest is Melanie Gray. I first heard of Melanie by listening to Daniel Newman's podcast, the Talking Type 1 podcast. And if you have listened to past episodes, you know that he was a guest on my show last time. And so I wanted to chat with Melanie because I feel like we do have a lot in common about our experiences with diabetes burnout and disordered eating and thinking and diabulimia. So I do want this to be a trigger warning to anyone who might feel a bit triggered by any of those topics. But it is even though it's a very heavy topic, I think Melanie and I both agree that it needs to be out there so that it can be more normalized. In preparing to talk with her, I looked up a statistic from the Emily Project, and as of 2018, diabetics are 2 to 4 times more likely than other non-diabetics to have an eating disorder. And women, females, the female gender, is twice as likely to have them as males. So we're really in a tough position as female diabetics. We were both kind of growing up at the same age, sort of pre-internet. And speaking for myself, I didn't know the term diabulimia existed. I didn't really know that many other diabetics would have thought to do that to themselves in order to try and lose weight. And it's a double-edged sword, but it is quasi comforting in a way to know that others have gone through the same experience as I have. So in that light, I'd like to welcome my guest, Melanie Gray, and thank her for being on the show to discuss her experience. So welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so thankful that you could join me, and I'm very happy to know that you are feeling better from our previously scheduled recording date.
Yes, so, much better, thank you.
Very happy to hear it. Okay, so before we get into your diagnosis story and then a bit of the heavier stuff, I just want to do some lightning round questions.
Okay.
A little bit of a lighter beginning to it. So,
yeah.
Date of diagnosis?
January 1998.
All right. And age at the time you were diagnosed?
I had just turned 12.
Do you recall what your blood sugar was when you were diagnosed?
I don't actually think I was told. I remember I was diagnosed at the GP surgery, and then I was admitted to hospital the next day. We lived quite a bit away from a city, so it was quite late at night. It was winter time, so it was quite difficult for us to get there. So I just remember being admitted, and I think they said it was sort of well, in the UK sort of way of reading it would have been about 30. So
Okay.
I remember them saying that at the time.
And
So,
so you have to multiply by 18, right? Is that
all right, okay.
for
I
for
have got
for
no
US
idea.
listeners? Yes, yeah, for milligrams per deciliter,
Okay,
I think it's times 18 of the
wow.
millimoles per liter, right?
Okay, so
Um,
a
you know,
lot.
yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. And what has been your lowest blood sugar ever?
I think it was about 1.2.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, quite low. I'm surprised I was still able to even talk and
Yeah,
function.
absolutely. And do you recall what your highest would have been ever?
Probably um, at my initial diagnosis. I think that's probably
That's great.
highest.
That's great. I'm jealous. What, uh,
Potentially higher. I definitely know ketones were not. That's a different story.
yeah, yeah. Okay. What was your lowest A1C ever?
Gosh, I don't actually know. I never got told my A1C until I was an adult. They
Oh
never used to
wow.
tell us that. So
Okay. Do you know any reasoning behind that?
I just don't think they really focused on A1C that much. And believe a lot of places aren't focusing on it so much these days.
Okay. Okay. Well, then you might not also know what your highest might have been.
Probably when I was in DKA, they checked it then, and I think it was about, now I'm talking, mm, I don't know if it's the same if how you read it, but we do it like old school kind of way. It's like
Okay.
percentage.
Right.
So it was
Yep.
14.8.
Okay. Yep. Yep. That, that
So
sounds
pretty high.
yeah. Okay. So pump or injections, and if pump, what brand?
I do injections.
Okay.
I'm on a waiting list for a pump,
Okay.
so fingers crossed.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you get to choose which brand, or do they kind of assign what
I
they?
don't have a clue.
Okay. All right. And then so I'm guessing you don't have a CGM either, right? Or
I do, yeah, yeah,
oh,
I
okay.
do. Yeah,
That must be helpful then with the injections.
it is very helpful. Yeah, we had to do a bit of yeah, we had to work a bit quite hard to get it prescribed, but we got it. So in
Great.
the end, so it
Yeah.
was.
Okay. And what is either the funniest or most ridiculous thing someone has confused your monitor or your needles or your CGM for?
Um, I don't think anybody's ever has, to be honest.
I
I'm
feel
quite
like maybe
lucky.
it's me.
I think I'm quite lucky. Usually, I get a sort of with my Libra. It's usually a what's that?
Right,
What's
right.
that thing? Even nurses like what's that attached to you?
Yeah,
That's about the only thing I ever get.
I just went for a procedure and the MRI tech, his daughter has type 1 and she
Ah.
has the CGM and he still wondered what my Libre was and how it
Oh
worked.
well, there you go.
So
Doesn't pay enough attention, clearly.
yeah, yeah. So it's not just who's unfamiliar with it.
Yeah, strange.
Yeah, a bit, a bit.
Yeah.
Let's see. The biggest thing that you think that diabetes has taught you up until now.
Mm, I think put your health first. Um, I think it's taught me to sort of not, especially I think maybe from like a work capacity. Like I feel like I used to put my work before my health,
right.
So then my health would suffer, or I would put other people before myself. And it's not selfish to do that. Um, and
Yeah,
I do take more time up for myself these days, and my as a result, my health is better. My diabetes is better controlled because I do that. So
that's fantastic. And I do wonder, at least for the last few, well, up until very recently, in terms of sort of gender nonconforming teachings. Prior to that, when there was more gender roles assigned,
mhm.
that we have often been told as females that you should be looking after everyone first,
Yeah,
and and that it would be kind of selfish to look after yourself. But I'm very encouraged to know that nowadays there's a lot more about self-care and self-love and wellness and prioritizing one's health. So I'm hoping that future generations won't be confined to those roles.
yes, definitely, I agree.
That's a great that's a great thing to take from it. And then last lightning round question is, if you could give one piece of advice to a newly diagnosed 12-year-old Melanie Gray, what would that be?
Oh gosh, it's a difficult question. Um, I think just take time for yourself. Don't be hard on yourself. You know, nobody's perfect. You can never be perfect.
Despite what
You know,
societal images might suggest. Yeah.
I think one of the things that's a little bit toxic, perhaps, that people keep telling you when you're diagnosed, you can do anything. You're amazing. Don't let it stop you. It's like, yeah, but sometimes it is hard to do things. It doesn't stop you, but it can hold you back a little bit.
Right.
And I think I always sort of thought, oh gosh, everybody else is doing these things, and why am I struggling? And I think that put more pressure on me, really. So, you
I
know,
completely agree. And I think my parents did the very same thing and said, it's not you're not limited. You have diabetes. You're not a diabetic in terms of like you have the control over it. Um, and and I don't blame them for providing me with those messages, but I do think that the way I absorbed them was, you can't let this hold you back, to an extreme point where I almost ignored it
yeah,
in pursuit of my goals. And I would never want to tell another young diabetic that they are limited, that they can't do anything that they want to put
no,
their mind to. But as you say, you have to be cognizant of what your health requirements are and what your bodily limits are. And while you can pursue great things, if you're not taking care of your health and recognizing what your needs are, you're really almost, tying one hand behind your back when you're trying to go after these things and you
sure,
already have those difficulties with your health. So,
yeah,
yeah, I think that's a wonderful piece of advice. And I often wonder, looking back now, would I have consumed any of that advice? Um, I know
yeah,
that maybe if I had heard it from another diabetic in my position, in an older diabetic who had been through these things, and maybe I would have, as opposed
yeah,
to like a healthcare professional or your parents. But who knows? But like, here's hoping that there are those out there listening to these stories and consuming these experiences, and knowing that they don't have to suffer the same fate as
yeah,
us have had to.
definitely.
So going into your diagnosis story, because you were a preteen, did you find it harder to sort of transition into being a diabetic and kind of cutting out sweets, or not being able to do some of the same things that your friends were doing?
Um, I think there was an element of yeah, definitely. I had literally just started secondary school. Um, so I was at that age. it was difficult anyway, trying to sort of fit in and use school and making friends and things. So because at the time when I was diagnosed, and I think things are very, very different these days, I had to be admitted to hospital for about 4 days. I had to take time off of school, to sort of get everything established, what would happen. And the school weren't really any like very equipped because they didn't have any diabetic students at that point. So it was all very new for everyone. So yeah, it was quite a hard adjustment. And in terms of things like food, I don't think anybody knew what they were doing. So it wasn't just me that was learning; it was my family. So it was quite a big change.
Sure. Absolutely. And so no one else in your family or extended family had any experience with diabetes up until that
No,
point? Okay.
not at all, none whatsoever. Not even type 2,
Okay.
nothing.
Great. And in terms of, I know you had said before that you live kind of a bit away from a city. Were you in a smaller community? Was the school kind of smaller? Um,
Um, I come from quite a small place, but the place I went to school was like in another town.
okay.
It was quite a fairly small place, but not compared to where I actually lived. So the
Okay.
school was quite big.
They
So it
just
was
hadn't had any other diabetics at that point.
just didn't have any. No, they
Yeah.
just. Perhaps maybe in previous years, I'm not sure, but certainly not when I was there. So yeah, so I was definitely alone.
That had to have been tough. Did you feel like you were supported by your healthcare professionals? Did you get any kind of, in other than being in the hospital initially? Did you get any training in terms of what to do?
We had a nurse that used to come out. Well, I'd say a nurse. I'm not really sure if that was actually her title, but this lady used to
Okay.
come out to the house every now and again. But I really didn't get on board with her because I found her very old fashioned and very, I don't know, I just didn't. There was something about her I just couldn't take to her, and I never wanted to talk to her when she came to the house, and I would disappear to my room. Basically, I'd leave her with my parents. I felt awkward with her. I
Yeah.
think it was just my age. I was just
Sure.
so.
Excited.
I don't know though, because when I did speak to her, she didn't really give us any advice. She was more interested in giving us advice on like benefits that we could claim.
Okay.
And I kind of felt like, well, that's not really what we're here for, you know? But
Right.
and it was strange.
Okay.
I didn't but other than that, really there wasn't a lot of support um back then. I don't feel so. I found I felt like I was quite alone a lot of the time in my with my illness.
Right.
There was nobody that we could contact. Like nowadays, you get like your district nurse that you can phone. There's like the diabetic, obviously, team you can contact for any support. But at that point, there was nothing like that. So it
Right.
was difficult.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And in terms of now getting into sort of the struggles that you experienced with the diabetes, that happened in your 20s. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, I would say sort of early 20s. Yeah.
So kind of building up to that point, did you was it tough for you to pair giving yourself this steroid, the and then having to eat, especially when your blood sugar is going low, and then also growing into yourself and becoming a young woman and being a teenager and trying to fit in and trying to date and all of that. how was that like leading up before you got into any of the disordered eating in terms of diabetes?
Um, I think I always had a bit of an issue with like my appearance, things like that. So even before I was diabetic, I was always like on the heavier side. So I think those kind of things were always in my head. But as you say, I think getting to that age leading up to it, there's a lot of pressure from, your friends or, you know, media, even before the likes of Instagram and things like that, we had magazines, that, your Cosmopolitan and whatever that would show these beautiful models. And it was always about, oh, what's the next fad sort of diet to follow, things like that. So, there's this conflict in your head as well. Like, well, I should be healthy, but you're wanting to follow all these beautiful people and things as well. It was, I think there was a lot of elements that kind of led up to that point.
Right, right. There certainly were for me as well. Um, and then in terms of, I'm interested to learn how you first kind of stumbled upon this as a, for lack of a better term, weight loss tool. Because I think you and I had discussed previously that I first saw a girl at diabetic camp kind of not eating and being very confused, like, how can she do that? Doesn't she have to, make sure that she's eating so she doesn't go low? And I wasn't even thinking of not like withholding insulin.
Mhm.
But then, of course, later on, I discovered it without knowing there was a term for it. And I think something like, I'll look up the statistic later to just be sure, but I'm pretty sure like 1 in 4 diabetic women um, do this
Yeah.
at some point.
Yeah, I think it is quite a yeah, I think that sounds about right
So,
from what I remember.
what was your experience, if you can remember? Like, how did you first realize, like, oh, hey, I might try this to try and keep some weight off?
Well, see, the first time I actually sort of came across someone that actually was doing this was probably when I was about 16 and I'd moved to sort of the adult clinic.
Hmm.
And it was a girl in the waiting room, and it was just me and her sat there, and we're chatting. And she was very, very skinny, very unhealthy looking. She didn't look well. And she said, "Oh, I'm just gonna eat this Mars bar." And she was sitting eating chocolate, and I was shocked because I thought, "Oh my goodness." And she goes, "Well, it doesn't matter because I don't take my insulin, so I won't put weight on." And I thought, "Oh." And at that point, I thought, well, she's stupid. That's all I thought, and which is a horrible way to put it. But at the time, that's exactly what I thought.
Right.
I thought, well, she's daft. And she was very, blasé about it, the way she spoke. But I think probably deep down, she was probably, feeling all sorts of things inside.
Oh, I'm
And
sure.
I just thought her attitude stank, and I just thought, oh wow. And I didn't even think anything of it. But at a later point, I did always think back to her saying that, but that's not really what pushed me into doing it. But I think I can't even. I think the point for me, and not where I didn't stop taking my insulin at that point. Um, but I think when my brother actually passed away when I was 22,
Mhm.
and I think I started losing weight then. Um, Partly because I wasn't eating as well. I was exercising more, trying to keep myself busy because I was grieving.
Right.
But then that kind of slowed down that weight loss after a while, and I thought, hmm. And of course, the internet was kind of a bit more of a thing by that point. So, you start Googling things and you get led down rabbit holes about all these things. And then I thought, yeah, okay, because I sort of discovered, people talking about these things online. And
Right.
you just sort of, for a start, I kind of I did it a little bit, and then I realized, oh, I don't feel very well when I don't take my insulin, and then I stopped. So I kind of stopped and started. It wasn't just like bam, full on into it. So it was always kind of stops and starts with it.
Right. And I am very sorry about your brother passing. Um, and of course, I'm not. I hope any listener hearing this. Obviously, I'm not asking these questions as a way to kind of glamorize it or promote it or try and
No, no.
encourage it. But I do think it's important to know where we're all getting this exact same idea from, even if it's not looking at the internet or meeting someone else and specifically being told, hey, here's how you lose weight.
Mhm.
And perhaps it's almost a side effect of, I'm sure at some point my doctors said something about, if you don't cover it with insulin, then your body's not going to be able to properly digest it. Um, but it's just kind of almost fascinating to me that we all almost try and use it as a way to control our weight, um, when we almost, at least for me, I know that I felt a lack of control, especially when my blood sugars would go one way when I'm doing the exact same thing I'd been doing over and over again. It somehow responds differently.
Yeah.
So I know that that was a way to kind of say, well, you know what? I'm not going to even bother trying to control it if you're not going to act the way I want you to act.
Yeah.
And I get to eat all these awesome foods and I get to lose weight. Um, but it is really, I didn't even know it was a term until maybe 2 years ago. And I'm not sure if that was the same with you. Did you even know that there was a term
And
for it?
no, I've known for quite a long time actually. I remember I purchased a book when I was my mid-20s, I would say, and it was just entitled Diabulimia.
Okay.
I can't remember the lady that wrote it, but the lady that wrote it actually had suffered from diabulimia herself, but she had been diagnosed with diabetes, I think, like in the 70s.
Wow.
So, but obviously, all that time there wasn't a term for it, and she didn't know really what it was. But that's the only reason I knew what it was called. So, or well, people want to call it. I know that's not the medical sort of
Right.
term for it, but
Right. Although I'd have to imagine that with that many of us doing it, that it might, you know, gain a little bit more of traction in the medical community in terms of, yes, this is an actual condition. It's not
yeah,
just rare thing that the occasional diabetic is doing.
no, definitely not.
And so when you bought that book, was the intent, I'm going to try and better understand where this is coming from and maybe how to stop doing it in the future? Because
Mhm.
were you still on and off doing it when you bought the book?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think when I bought the book, that was probably. I actually think that was probably neither sort of the start. That was the sort of beginning of it. It wasn't at its worst at that point, but I kind of acknowledged that it wasn't a normal thing to be thinking, and
Mm.
I kind of wanted, yeah, it was more like a sort of a helpful tool to sort of, right, understand how did someone overcome this. But to be honest, I think a lot of it I read, but I didn't fully take it in, and I wasn't really suffering any consequences of what I was doing at that point. And I kind of felt like, well, I'm not that bad. I'm not at that point. I'm probably okay. Maybe I'm panicking about this for no reason, and
Mm.
kind of just put it aside and forgot about it, really.
Okay. And besides looking at the book, were you telling any of your family members or friends?
No, not at all. No, I would have been too scared to say to anyone,
Right.
because
Yeah.
I know the reaction I would have got.
Right. As was I. Um oh, actually, Well, the thing that I had written was 40% of female diabetics participate in it. So that's
Yeah.
actually more than 1 in 4. Um, so let's see. You said that at that point in your mid-20s wasn't kind of the worst of it. When would you say that again, for lack of a better term, kind of hit rock bottom?
I would say my late 20s. So around the age of 29, 30 thereabouts. When I had turned 30, I had a period of time where I was particularly, I think I would just gotten really bad with it. It was just like a everyday thing, like I would skip so much insulin. I would just take the smallest amount of like quick acting insulin. I never take my background insulin. Um, and there was a few things. I'd gone and visited my sister one day, and I had to get a train there and get a train home again. And when I came back on the train, I was just like being sick everywhere, and I was struggling to even get in myself into a taxi to get home because I knew I couldn't get a bus home. Eventually, I got home, and the whole night I was being sick. The next day, my mum had called me, and she she's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Oh no, I'm gonna have to hang up. I feel sick." And then I didn't answer my phone again, and she panicked. And her and my dad just got in the car and got straight to my flat. Thankfully, they did. I managed to answer the door, unlock the door, and then I spun around, went into my bedroom, and just threw myself on my bed. And my mum and dad just had to phone an ambulance because they could just see that I was in so much pain. My stomach felt like it was on fire. I
Mhm.
couldn't sit up. I was in so much pain. And I don't really remember much other than them putting me in the ambulance after that. I remember waking up and I was in the hospital, but I sort of kept sort of drifting in and out of consciousness with it. And it was just horrendous, but that was the worst point. And I remember hearing the doctor speaking to my dad, and I heard him say, I specifically remember him saying, um, I think we've got her, but I think you've gotten her in here at the right time because, if you had been any later, she might not be here, kind of thing. So, and that was a real wake up call to hear that.
Right.
Scary.
Yeah. Uh, and is that when you had DKA? Were you in DKA
Yeah.
at the point?
Yeah, I was in DK, so I was kept in hospital for a few days. At that point, I was in high dependency, just trying to get my body back to normal.
Right.
Just really tough.
And at that point, I mean, obviously not as you're in and out of consciousness, but when you kind of got past the worst of it, did you have a discussion with your parents about what had been going on, or how did you explain like what had preceded that?
The thing is, they knew what was happening. I had spoken with them briefly a few years previous to that ongoing. I'd gone to see one of my diabetic consultants at the time, and I'd actually written everything down because I couldn't speak about it. I just couldn't talk because I would get really emotional.
Mhm.
And she read it and she went, "Right, okay, it's fine, we'll get things sorted." But nothing ever came of it. But when I'd gone to see her and tell her this, I approached my mum and dad and said, "Look, I don't want you to be scared, but this is how I'm feeling. This is what's happening." And I think they kind of just felt that, "Oh, well, you've told the doctors, so they're helping you." So I think they kind of just went, "Well, we'll leave it in their hands because that's their job." And
Right.
I don't think my parents realized that I hadn't had the help that I needed. And I think they didn't realize that I was still doing this. And my sister said she knew. She said it was so obvious to me, but I think my parents obviously just wanted to maybe believe that it wasn't true. So it kind of made it easier to talk to them, but yeah,
Yeah.
it was
My
hard.
my parents were, sort of similar because I had been, working out a great deal as well, doing a lot more cardio and losing weight that way. I also stopped
Okay.
eating red meat, and so I kind of had that to use as sort of the excuse.
Yeah.
And
Excuses, yeah.
but then I got to a point where I had lost like 40 pounds, and I was just very weakened, especially with my athletic performances. And they almost assumed when my doctor was like, "Oh, okay, well maybe it's exercise bulimia," that would be it. That was okay. We've brought her. They gave her an explanation. They've made it clear what's going on, and so again, assuming that that's gonna. Or I don't know. I don't know that many, obviously non-diabetics, but even diabetics who don't go through this would necessarily know how to kind of snap someone out of it or what they
Yeah.
could do to help, because in my opinion, obviously it's not technically a medical condition, but it very much to me feels like almost an addiction where
Yeah. Yeah.
you can say, all right, I'm not going to do it anymore, and then you do it once and you're like in it again, and it's hard to get yourself out of it.
Mm.
So with all kind of either disordered thinking or addictive situations, your family can want to do everything to try and help you, but they might not necessarily either know how or be able to
Yeah.
get you out of it. So
Complete.
once you were out of the hospital at that point, um was that the breaking point for it? Like, what did you start talking to a different medical professional, or did you start, how did you kind of climb out of the worst of it?
Yeah. Yeah. So whilst I was still in hospital, a diabetic consultant came to see me. I'd never met her before, but she truly was the one that gave me that sort of turning point. And she sat and spoke to me and just said, "Look, I'm not here to judge you or tell you what's right or wrong." She says, "I just want to help you, and I'm here to get you back on track." She says, "We'll do things at your pace." So I saw her once I was out of hospital again, and there was a lot of discussion with her, and there was another nurse that was really sort of a big thing in my recovery as well. She really helped me as well, and I think I was able to email her when I was feeling maybe a little bit unsure about things or a bit unstable, and like even if it was midnight, I could email and she would pick it up in the morning and get back to me and be like, "Look, you're fine. I'm here." Um, and I think having a new team and sort of maybe like fresh sort of perspective on things, there are
Right.
younger people perhaps learning sort of all the newer sort of things going on. I don't know about yourself, but like when I was diagnosed and right up through my 20s, I had no idea or concept of what carb counting was or anything like that. I was never told insulin ratios and things like that. I was never taught anything like that. So, everything, it was like being a newly diagnosed diabetic again and really just starting from scratch. That's what it felt like. And I think when I treated it that way, I think I managed to sort of grasp these things. And like you're saying, like an addiction, it was breaking that habit of not taking insulin and not doing these things. Check your blood sugars, because I wasn't doing any of that. So I feel I just had to sort of push myself to sort of rewire the way I thought, basically.
Yeah,
But
that's a
they,
great way to put it. So I
yeah,
think with most young females, and hopefully it's changing now, but especially in the future, in past generations, it was really about this very strained relationship between food and self-perception and feeling confident and feeling attractive. And
Yeah.
so a lot of females have that struggle with eating. So then you have to add in the fact that you're obsessed. As a diabetic, you have to be obsessed with what you're putting in
Yeah.
your body.
Mhm.
If you haven't been taught carb counting at that point, you're still aware of the caloric content of what you're having.
Mhm.
Um, so it's this not problem, but you can't get away from the thing that is causing you to self-harm. And it's not like you can have a choice to stop eating in the future. You will always have to have a healthier relationship with food. So for young people who already think they're invincible or really just don't take to heart the warnings that people are telling you of, hey, if you do this, you might 30 years in the future have a surgery or have an amputation or have, eye problems, vision problems. You're not thinking it's ever going to happen to you, and you're
No.
not really, for some reason, you're really not thinking of the future in that way. Or that you'll somehow have time to fix it later on, which was what I was thinking. uh so I
Yeah.
think it's I'm hoping that it doesn't have to be something that many diabetics have to experience in the future. Maybe it is just something that a lot of us go through in terms of either diabetic burnout or rebellion. Um, and I know that there's been a focus now on what the emotional toll is for having a CGM and constantly seeing those numbers.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know for me, it's been a help instead of a hindrance because I would rather, if I am going high or I'm already high, I'd rather be able to stave off how long it's lasting rather than
Yeah.
worrying about, okay, well, I failed because my blood sugar's high. It's like, okay, well, I'm glad I have
Yeah.
that piece of information because now I can bring it back down and I can
Yeah.
lower the
I
amount.
I do think with the CDM, I mean, for me personally, I do feel it's made a huge difference to me, really improved things for me. But I can also see from that side of things that the people that already are sort of striving for perfection, so to speak, it really affects them. And I do see people, oh wow, it was in double figures today. It's like, yeah, your sugars will go into double figures. That's not, people that aren't diabetic that happens to. My nurse told me that. She says we got to wear them for a few weeks and we could see when we ate a big bowl of pasta, our sugar levels shot up.
Sure.
We were shocked. We thought we were diabetic. It's like, yeah. And because you don't see that all the time, it's hard to kind of understand what's going on, but you can understand where it could be a negative thing as well for people. It's
Absolutely. I know I
yeah.
try to explain that to a friend of mine who is going through this food elimination diet or procedure. Um, and she was explaining how certain foods, like I think it was potatoes, made her very sleepy. And I said, well,
Mm,
yeah, that's, you hear about everyone having that afternoon lull at work is because most people, if you're eating carbs at lunch, you're going to have that crash. Or but first you're going to go high, and when my blood sugar's high, I need to fall asleep. I can't keep my eyes open.
no. Yeah.
So yeah, but I do think in terms of disordered eating and thinking and concern about appearance versus health, um I didn't want to see those numbers because I knew they were going to be sky high. So
Yeah.
I just did
Yeah.
not want that piece of information. But now to see it as helpful data, just because you're not looking at the number doesn't mean it's not there. Your blood
Yeah.
sugar is still going to be high whether
Yeah.
you
It's still going to be that regardless.
right. And I
Yeah.
remember my doctor at one point saying, well, if you go to bed high and you wake up high, you're at least high for a third of your day. that's a long time, and I didn't even
Mhm.
think of it in those terms, but if you think of it in terms of, like, the longer you let it go, the worse off your body's gonna be.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah,
it is
definitely.
a helpful way to look at it, but it's something that's very difficult to come to terms with, especially
Yeah,
like you
yeah,
said, if you're a perfectionist out there, which I think a lot of us are kind of almost doomed to be with diabetes.
yeah, definitely.
So
Yeah.
when you were trying to get back out of it and you had less judgmental healthcare professionals, which that's what saved me, I think that was my turning point, was a
Mhm.
non-judgmental doctor. Um, were there any pieces of information that really helped you kind of ease back into it? Was there a way of, as you say, that of reframing the way you looked at things and you were relearning? What got you through the points of, oh God, well, I know if I have this much insulin, I'm regularly eating and covering it, I'm going to gain some weight. How did you kind of get through that struggle, if there was a struggle at that point?
Um, I think the main thing for me was how close I came to death, essentially.
Mm.
Um, and I think a lot of the complications that I'd had as well, I think those things are very sobering,
Right.
you know. Um, and I think the further I went on with my recovery, the more I sort of thought to myself, "Well, look, I'm doing this. I'm getting there, and I don't want to undo all that good work again because that almost feels like taking a major step back." And there, I think just as a human being, the way that we're made, it's just like, well, I'm not giving up all that for the sake of losing a little bit of weight again. And I
Right.
don't want to cause, like, I've had a lot of complications with my eyes, for example. I had a real problem with neuropathy, which was complete agony in my body, and actually got worse when I tried to get better, because I had tried to get better so quickly that my body, like your nerves start to, yeah, it's so painful. And so, like, really, my doctor was like, take your time, ease off a bit, just, you know, we're getting there. Very small baby steps, basically. I was told things like, you're not checking your sugars at all just now. Check them once a day, once every couple of days if you can, just to have a little point of reference where you're at with your sugar levels. Things like that. It was just really small steps. And then when you look back, you think, wow, I've actually achieved so much. And that actually made me feel proud. And even seeing my HB1C coming down, small, small steps, was really encouraging. So I think just attending the clinic was a big help,
And prior
which,
to that, did you avoid any appointments?
oh, completely. Yeah, just no contact at all. I just didn't want to. I
Right.
was so scared of what they would say to me. And I just felt like with what I was doing, it was kind of almost pointless going, because, well, if I'm not going to be behaving myself, so to speak, I don't like that term, but that's how they used to put it towards you. I just felt like, well, they can't do it if they can't help me with this side of things. Then that's not going to do anything for my diabetes. Like, I need my mental health to be helped rather than my physical. Because if my mental health isn't right, my physical health won't be right.
Wow, that very very insightful. I have to say, when I was going through it, I avoided them, but solely because I didn't want the judgment and and I kept lying to myself and saying, "All right, if you just put off one more appointment, then you'll have enough time to get it back into control, and then they won't judge you because it'll be better." And then inevitably it wouldn't. And then I'd cancel another appointment and another. So, but that's very insightful to know that I'm not again, I'm not advocating not going to see your doctors, but
No, not at all.
to be in it and saying, well, they're not going to be able to help me anyways. But were you trying at that point to seek any mental health counseling as a
Yeah. Yeah, I did see, so it's like the local sort of
Right.
hospital that deals with sort of psychiatry and, psychology and that side of things. I did see someone, um, but sadly, it was all very much aimed towards like anorexia and bulimia, and they kind of tried to box you into those terms. And I just felt like it wasn't helpful to me because it didn't take into the factor of you need to take your insulin.
Right.
And that was the problem for me. I couldn't take my insulin. I was finding that difficult.
Right.
Whereas they thought, oh, well, you're struggling to eat. And I said, no, I'm not struggling to eat. I can eat fine.
Right.
Oh, well, you know, things like, you need to, they were trying to encourage you to eat more. They were trying to make you not think about your food. And it's like, I need to think about what I'm eating.
Right.
So, it's not, these things, even now, like people say, oh, you shouldn't be weighing yourself every day. And it's like, I've got kidney failure. I have to weigh myself every day. So, these things are all like little hurdles as well that I've had to overcome because I have to do these things to help my physical health. But my mental health is something that I have to keep working on. So it's a total minefield.
Absolutely. And it's not specifically to anyone's fault or discredit for not being able to kind of wrap their head around that extra hurdle or multiple hurdles because it is such a unique thing. And I'm not
Mhm.
diminishing anyone who has any other kind of disordered eating, but as we've talked a bit about, you know, this isn't just be healthy, don't worry about your weight, don't worry about the scales, don't
Yeah.
focus so much on caloric content. We have to. We
Yeah,
have
we have to.
as
Yeah.
part of our health. And especially for you with the kidney failure, you have to keep weighing yourself. Like that is one thing. I mean, I go to so many doctor's appointments and specialists. I'm weighed all the time, but
Yeah.
I don't weigh myself at home anymore because I
Mhm.
know that could be a, a disservice to my mental health.
Yeah.
But for you, you have to also do that to keep yourself healthy and to make sure that
Yeah.
you're on top of things. So, um, I think it's because of that unique extra step of everything that we cannot avoid if we do want to be healthy, and giving yourself something that, you know, who as a female who wants to look a certain way is going to intentionally inject themselves with something that is known to gain weight, to
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just
That's it. I mean, it goes against what you
right.
what you want to achieve. So why would you do that to yourself? I
And
know.
I mean, I don't care what size you are. I don't care how self-confident you are. I don't think there are very many females out there that would voluntarily do something that's going to make them gain weight in
No,
that way.
definitely not.
Um,
Definitely not.
but as you say, and as I've learned, and as I think probably anyone who's been able to recover from diabulimia or the burnout has realized, is that as hurtful as it can be to our self-esteem or our body image, the actual and significant and life-threatening or life-ending consequences of doing this, especially over an extended period of time, is absolutely not worth it.
No.
So if you could talk a bit, I know that your kidney failure is not related to the diabetes, but if you could talk a bit about the retinopathy and the neuropathy a bit more.
Yeah. I don't even really remember exactly. I remember I was with the retinopathy. I was getting a lot of these flare ups, sort of like inflammation in my eyes. It was called uveitis, and my eyes would water, really painful. Couldn't open them, couldn't close them. It was just awful. And this happened a number of times. So the clinic sort of saw me fairly regularly, and then eventually it was sort of, they said, well, look, you know, you've got bleeds in the backs of your eyes. We're going to do sort of laser treatment on them. So that was done a few times.
Mhm.
I was struggling with it a little bit. It was quite hard to sit and get it done. And then eventually they were like, look, I don't think it's doing anything for you. I think we're going to have to start doing injections, which sounds absolutely horrific when you first hear it. You think, oh my goodness, needles in my eyes, what? Um, but actually, once I started getting them done, and I still regularly get them done now. I had them done last week actually. Totally fine with it now. It is just part of what keeps me going. But had I thought a few years back now that that's what my life was going to be, every 3 months going to get injections, I don't think, I think I would have thought twice about maybe what I was doing.
Right.
It's a scary thing, but, and like everything, you get used to it, but I'd rather not get used to it.
Right. I used to, when I would go for them, and I had about 3 dozen between the 2 eyes, I would get optic blocks to try and, like, numb the optic nerve, but half the time it wouldn't work. So then I've got the Novocaine in my cheek, in my optic nerve-ish, but not really in the
Mhm.
nerve, and then that being painful and it making my eyeball feel like it's gonna pop out of its socket,
Oh,
and
oh
then
no.
still being the pain of the procedure. I think I scared off a lot of my doctor's patients because I was screaming so loud in the procedure room.
Yeah.
It's a very sobering thing, especially
Mm.
with your vision, to know, like, okay, now I'm just. I even had a family friend of my parents when I was growing up, and he had lost his vision in one of his eyes, but they were like, "Oh, don't worry. He used to eat bags of M&Ms, every night in college, and he completely just let himself go." And I still didn't use that as a reference point of
No.
maybe I shouldn't be doing this because I know Uncle so and so, and he only has one use of one eye.
Yeah.
I didn't even I didn't
I
even
think I think a lot of the time though you see it in an older person when you're younger and you think they're old though, that won't happen to me. Or it won't happen till I'm really old. And I'll
right,
never be old. So yeah. It's
fix it before it happens or something.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
as of now, I know that you just had, are they called Avastin? I know mine were called, the injections were called Avastin injections, but um having them now, are your eyes still actively bleeding, or do they think that they've mostly got it under control?
Yeah, they're not actively bleeding anymore. I've been told, like, the lady had a look at them and she says it looks like it's just all kind of old scar tissue and things there now. So basically, we're still maintaining the injections until I've had transplant. And once I've recovered from that, hopefully we can get the vitrectomy done at
Okay.
some point.
Yeah.
But obviously, that could be quite maybe another year or so down the line. But I think it's just a continuous kind of checkups, make sure you're okay, get your injections.
Right.
We'll see where we're at. We keep reviewing things. So I think that option is there for me once my body is recovered. And yeah,
Yeah.
I'm hoping anyway.
Yes. As am I. And I think that's also a great lesson to learn in terms of, not only should you be going to your regular appointments, even if you're not in the best control,
Yeah.
that's when it's almost more urgent to do so, because,
Hmm.
both my eyes have hemorrhaged. If they didn't get to them in enough time, I could have gone blind. So that's not the time that you want to avoid care. There's never
Yeah,
really a time to for a diabetic, but
if there is a problem there, they can pick up on it. You know, don't worry. There's always something they can do. Basically, I always feel like that, and that's maybe don't know, cocky, but you know what I mean. It's kind of like, you know, I I always feel like there's always a solution somewhere, but you know, you need to be actively seeking out that help to, you know, have something to fix it or at
or
least help.
yeah, or even just slow down the process. I mean, I do think that, I had a doctor, I think a rheumatologist, tell me, if I had been born a previous generation, I would have already been dead by my late 20s.
Yeah.
Not
Mhm.
very helpful, but probably accurate. But you have to consider the fact that you might still get it. You might be in perfect control and still have these complications, but
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
ignorance is not bliss in this context.
No.
And it's hard to kind of almost constantly get that reminder of, hey, this is something that you might have either caused or sped up because of your actions. But like you said, you have that opportunity to either prevent anything worse off from happening or to continue to try and better your health now. And that's what's most important, is probably that recalibrating the way you see things.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Yeah.
wonderful. And I wish we didn't have to have gone through what we'd gone through in order to get that. But
Yeah. I know.
makes us
It's
wiser, I guess. So in terms of the neuropathy, I have it as well, but I think you were talking to Daniel about how it would even hurt to shower. Is that right?
yeah, it's worst. Yeah. That's, as I say, when I was recovering and
Right.
my diabetes was a lot tighter, but I think it was too tight, so to speak. You know, it was,
Way too
it's
soon.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, it wasn't great. It was very painful. So water on my skin, drying off of the towel was so painful. Even like the wind on your skin, that sort of thing was just horrible. So I kind of walked around sort of hunched quite a lot of the time because I was trying to sort of save myself from that pain of, you know, if people bumping into you. You know, I could just feel it,
Right.
and it's just horrible.
And so has
And
I think you said that it has improved now with you
yeah,
getting better? Okay.
definitely. I don't feel that pain anymore. The only thing I occasionally get is my feet. I get little shocks through my feet. I don't have any feeling in my feet anymore either. So I've got to be quite careful and take care of my feet. I used to work in podiatry, so I know them all.
Ah,
I get my feet looked after, thankfully.
good, good. That's a nice little,
Yeah, it's like
yeah,
it's a good thing for a diabetic.
yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, not not for this to sound like a PSA, although I do hope it is, educational, but yeah, I mean, checking your feet, especially if you have the neuropathy, is so important,
Hmm.
and can really be saving in terms of mobility, because you don't want to have.
Completely. I mean, you literally could have major complications for your whole body, you know, with just something stuck in your foot or, you know, and you haven't noticed it. I've seen some horrific things, so
Sure.
I won't share.
Yeah,
But
no, I am sure you've seen, and I think it's almost like a caricature in movies sometimes of, the old auntie who's getting her leg amputated. She
yeah.
didn't take control of her fetus. But it is very true that
Hmm.
one neglect um can really create this avalanche of other complications. And I think it's a really important point as well that you had mentioned, that I didn't know until I was trying to recover from mine that if you go too fast, the opposite way, and you kind of get too tight of control too soon, you're at risk, I think, for like maybe a heart attack. And there are
Yeah,
a lot of things that can really negatively happen if you're trying to do what you think is what's best, right? Get
yeah,
back into
definitely.
tight control. But that's why it's really important
Yeah.
to get the
And
assistance,
that's what you think they want to see. But my
right?
doctor obviously was great in saying to me, like, please don't go too far with it. This is why, because, and she explained why. But it's not necessarily that all doctors are going to explain that either. So it is important to
Right.
share.
Or even think to warn their patient of that.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
but I think it probably, I know for me, but did you find that by going kind of baby step by baby step that it helped you um, continue in the process? Versus
Yeah.
they had said like, okay, you're at a 14.8, you have to get down to a 6, in the next 3 months,
Yeah, so I think they kind of said, "Look, let's just get you taking insulin again."
right?
That kind of thing, rather than numbers. They didn't care what your numbers were. They just wanted you to take insulin.
Right.
So even if you were still running, high teens kind of numbers, it was better than not having the insulin and running off the chart kind of numbers. So I appreciated that, so that I wasn't focusing on. And I was told, don't write anything down, don't record any of it, just
Helpful.
go with it, just
Yeah.
feel. So I mean, I think my initial thing was, take your background insulin. As
Hmm.
long as you're taking that, that's a good start.
Right.
And then we'll work on the other stuff. So it was a very gradual thing, but for me, it worked. I'm not saying that is the answer for everyone, but I definitely think it made it less scary.
Right. I do think that's a huge part of it, right? Is
Mm,
the fear of judgment, the fear of being ashamed, or that you're somehow going to be, even your efforts aren't going to be good enough. Um,
mm-mm.
I think it's really helpful in any kind of recovery situation to have that grace uh, handed to yourself, and then practicing self forgiveness and kind of easing back on the standards that we impose on ourselves.
And it was great, they gave you praise for, they praised you for, like, you're doing so well, like, please be, proud of yourself for achieving things, even though you don't think it's maybe much. It's something, and it's a step towards the right direction. And when people were telling you that, you kind of thought, well, they don't need to say that to me. They're not in a position that, you know. So even that was just such an encouraging thing.
Right, right. And I think that's a wonderful way to ease yourself into that mind frame too, of like, okay, well, if they're
Yeah,
praising what I think is like really not that big of a deal, then maybe I should be doing that too. Maybe I should be telling myself,
yeah,
all right, well, you did it, all things considered, done a really good job.
yeah, yeah,
So that's a good way to look at it. So in and at this point, you're still dealing with the retinopathy. You're still working on the kidney issue, but in
yeah.
terms of, in general, your health over the last 4 years or so, are you feeling better? Are you, not just mentally but physically feeling better?
Um, I mean, it's kind of hard to say because of the kidney problems. I think because that all started about 3 years ago, I think I had a very short window where, yeah, I was feeling much better about myself physically and mentally. I was doing much better. And I do feel that once I got sepsis, I think that really just, it really hit me hard again. And I kind of had to sort of start over again, sorry, so to speak. It was And there's been so many changes to my body I've had to adjust to. But it's helped me realize that I can make these adjustments and I am capable, and I do everything really by myself. My dialysis is my own thing. Nobody does that for me.
Yeah.
And I've been told yet again, once I've had transplant because of steroids and things, my diabetes again will become another challenge
Right.
yet again for me. So it's just sort of, I don't think too far ahead. I don't even want to think about that at the moment. I will deal with it as it comes. And but yeah, I think physically, in terms of diabetes, I think I am so much better with it. And although I maybe don't feel the benefits at the
Mhm.
moment, I think I will do once things are a bit better for me. And just knowing that I'm in control of that, and you know I can allow myself to be, like if I want to go and have pizza, I'll go and have pizza kind of thing. Whereas before it was like, no,
Right.
or it's all or nothing kind of thing. But now it's like, yeah, it's all about a balance, and yeah, I definitely feel a lot better in that sense of things.
That's great. I can completely relate because about maybe 2, 3 years into really getting out of the worst of my diabulimia, ugh, I lost a bunch of weight. I started healthily, um,
Hopefully, yeah.
and slowly. But I was working out a lot more. I had much better work-life balance, because I really was like, workaholic type situation. And I was feeling so much better. My diabetes was doing better. Things were stabilizing. And then within a year of like my peak, a childhood tumor remnant grew back on my spine, and now I'm disabled. And so it is that process of like, okay, well, this has nothing to do with the diabetes.
Yeah.
At least I can say this part I had nothing to do with. It wasn't something that I did that caused this, but now I have to try and figure out how I can get any kind of exercise in without pain.
Yeah.
I have to figure out how to adjust to all these other ailments and still keep a priority on the diabetes.
Hmm.
But as you've said, having gone through everything that I have with the diabetes and the diabetic related complications, it's almost as if I can handle this challenge
Yeah.
better
Yeah,
because
definitely.
because I've done that. So I think it's also important to highlight that, you can have tough periods with your diabetes. You can also get a lot better. Your health might throw you a different curveball,
Yeah.
and you still have to keep in mind good diabetic control, but also kind of like be mentally adaptive enough that you can recalibrate your physical mobility. You can recalibrate, how you view yourself, your quality of life. So it's really a never ending process. But I think if you've got that good foundation to work on, even if you have tough periods, like you've said, you can kind of put less pressure on the future
Yeah.
and make sure that you're just doing the best you can at any given moment.
Yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, you got to give yourself credit, for what you sometimes think that you can't do things, and I'll never be able to do that. But it's amazing what you can do when you put your mind to it, and when you're faced with these things, because it's not a choice. It's not a choice for you to have a disability, it's, and you just think, right, I've got to think of this as a, like, right, how do I sort of not start over, that's not the what I'm looking to say, but you've got to kind of say, right, how do I do things differently now? Yes.
Without focusing on the what ifs or the
Mhm.
this is what happened in the past or this is what I can't do now versus what I used to before. And I think because diabetes tends to also like interact with other health conditions so much,
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
bravely, that we sometimes don't know what's going to happen with our bodies in the future. So being more kind of adaptable and relaxed about it is very important point, and
Yeah.
an
And
admirable thing I think anyone who's going through it needs to keep an eye on. No
And I
pressure.
think people need to realize that being flexible doesn't mean that you're not caring about your diabetes, but you have to kind of give yourself a sort of wider range of, you know, I can't say I have to have my sugar levels between 5 and 7, that's just not, it's not always possible. You've got to allow yourself for these other things going on. So, yeah, definitely
And so drawing it back to the resources that you had at the time, I know that you had said that were seeing a program that mostly focused on the more traditional eating disorders, and then you found the book entitled Diabulimia. Uh,
Mhm.
I think you've referenced with Daniel the organization Diabetics with Eating Disorders, DWED.
Yes.
How
Uh-huh.
did you come across that organization?
Um, I think I remember it at the time just looking for um someone that kind of had some sort of understanding of it, and just sort of Googling and finding out. Um and yeah, I just happened to stumble across it, and at the time it was literally an email address of the lady that started it, Jacqueline. And I just used to email back and forth with her. But because she was just working, this was just like a charity that she had set up, and she personally was just dealing with everything. So, it would take a while between emails back and forth, but she was always there to support. And eventually there was like a forum and things like that on Facebook and things like that appeared, and that people are still part of now. She's actually just sort of ceased to kind of have the charity running now. This was literally just a few weeks back. She contacted, and she's moving on to bigger and better things, sort of thing, at the moment. So, but the forum is still definitely there. You can still access it if anybody needs to speak to someone. I mean, I know primarily a lot of people think it's just women, but there are males there as well, and all sorts of people from all walks of life, and a friendly bunch of people, and really supportive. And I've made some amazing friends through that website, and like, actually, like, close friends, in fact. So it's definitely a positive thing, and if you're struggling, definitely would say encourage you to go to that direction of things for some support.
Fantastic. I'll try and get the link to that forum to put on
Yeah,
the show notes or the website.
yeah,
Because I do think, I as we've talked about, hey, maybe it won't do anything. Maybe if I had spoken to, an older me at the time I was going through it, maybe I wouldn't have listened to her. But I think you can really take the advice, or at least consume the experience of someone else who's going through exactly what you're going through, as
yeah,
opposed to someone who might sort of almost be like lecturing you about it, or talking to you from a very sterile, objective medical perspective. And in terms of any kind of life experience, just knowing that there are others out there who can understand us can make all the difference in the world.
yeah.
So I was wondering, um, what if, and I'm not how do I want to say this? I'm not so presumptuous to assume that it doesn't already exist, but I'm not aware of it. So I'm going to throw it out there that if there were some sort of thing like a sponsor as they do in either AA or NA or SA. Um, is that something that you would maybe be interested in being or in seeing in the diabetic community, that there could be like sponsors for others who might be facing diabulimia or diabetic burnout?
Yeah, I mean, I guess unofficially, I've kind of done that with two girls, and they come to me when they're having a hard time, and it's a good thing to be able to support someone. It helps me too. But on an official kind of side of things, then yeah, I think it actually would be a really positive thing for people. If it was done via like your diabetic clinics and things like that, or whatever you attend, um, I think that would be a really positive thing because, like you say, I think sometimes just someone that's been through it sharing that experience is a little bit easier to take than a doctor that doesn't know what you're talking about. Like, they can understand to a point where they've seen it before, but they don't personally know how it feels. And I think having spoke to a number of people that have said, "Oh, I'm really struggling, and I really need to talk about it,"
Mhm.
where they would talk to me, they might not talk to their doctor about it, and it would be nice to sort of be able to even say, "Right, you come to me and talk to me about it, and I can then go back and speak to that doctor about it potentially," like something like that even would be, just a support. Even I'll come and hold your hand when you go and talk to them, that kind of thing would be, yeah, it's definitely something I'd be interested in. I don't know about yourself if that's how you feel or
I do, yeah. I mean, if I can be just kind of like a guiding point for anyone based on any experience that I've gone through, if I could help them, either better relate or feel some sort of comfort or compassion, I'm absolutely down for that. But I think you're right that it might be even more impactful and helpful if it is tied in with your diabetic care provider, and that
Mm,
they can, with the patient's knowledge, say, hey, look,
yeah,
we're going to have a chat. You can talk to me anytime. You don't have to talk to me kind of almost formally like you might with your doctor. But if I am going to present our discussions to them, especially maybe if it's gotten to a dangerous point, or I think that they could help alleviate the current problem that you're facing, or whatever it is. But I'm very encouraged by online forums like
yeah,
WED, and by knowing that doctors are, in general, I think hopefully diabetic specialists are getting more training in sort of the mental health impact, because
yeah,
I don't know about you, but I don't recall ever hearing from my doctor's office like, hey, here's how you treat the diabetes. X amount of carbs plus Y blood sugar equals Z number of units of insulin. But besides that, you might struggle mentally with
mhm,
dealing with this disease day in and day out for the rest of your life.
yeah,
And here's how you can better tackle that, as
yeah,
opposed to just the more medical part of it. So I'm very encouraged by hearing stories like yours, and knowing that there are others out there that have gone through it, and we're not gonna we're not gonna, just because you get through it doesn't mean you're gonna be perfect from here on out,
no,
or not
no,
now,
definitely not.
but at least, like we've talked about, having that better foundation, and really reaching the point where we know that we care more about living and our quality of life than
Mhm,
how many pounds or kilograms are being read on the scale. um, I think that's something that a lot of people have to come to terms with, but
yeah,
with diabetics it can be so much more drastic
yeah,
than for others. So is there anything else that you think would be helpful for diabetics in the future going forward in terms of like resources or things you'd like to see happening in the diabetic community to make others feel more understood or better understood or better cared for their needs cared for?
Um, I think there definitely needs to be more, as we've discussed, more focus on their mental health. I do believe it's still quite lacking.
Mhm.
Certainly, in terms of my local kind of area, I don't know about the rest of the world or the rest of the country. It can vary quite drastically. I've from talking to people from what I can hear, but I think overall, I think most places are struggling in the mental health side of things, and it really needs to be made like a connection with the two, physical and your mental health. There it just seems to be a complete sort of, they they just don't connect the two very well, and I think they have both equally impact each other. It's
Right. They're
and
very connected. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, there definitely needs to be more that side of things. That's the one thing I feel is lacking.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're getting quite good on the technology front and things like that, but there's still a human behind all of that technology and numbers and things, and they need to remember that.
Yeah, I often will will think like, just because you learned what diabetes is or how to treat it in a textbook doesn't
Yeah,
mean that you necessarily understand all the nuances of,
no, definitely not.
fluctuating hormones. And for me, the weather changes my blood sugar. Where if
Hmm.
I'm outside, I have heat intolerance and it spikes and causes a bunch of inflammation. So I think if people can take anything away from this episode, I think a big theme of it has been to not only be less harsh on ourselves, but the thing that seems to have helped us both come out of it is accessing healthcare professionals who were not judging us,
Yeah,
who were just strictly there to say, "Hey, you're human. You've slipped up here, but here's how we help you get back on better footing. And I'm here for you, not to grade you, not to judge you, but to assist you in bettering your health." And
yeah,
I think that's definitely also kind of universally lacking, and can be stressed. So I really, really appreciate you coming on and telling your story and being so forthcoming about everything that you've gone through. Um, I think it will do anyone listening so much good, and I can't thank you enough. So, uh, is there would you like to leave any kind of social media handles for how people could contact you if they do want to chat with you?
yeah. So you can contact me on Instagram. So I am at Melanie Jane Gray. Um, and I would openly say if anybody wants to contact me, I'm always here. Might take a little while to get back to you, but no, I am always there, and I'm quite happy for any questions or anybody that's even having a little bit of a hard time. It's all about helping one another and sharing our stories and hopefully reaching out to at least one person out there.
Agreed. Yeah, I if there's anything kind of positive um about this pandemic situation, it's that at least we are in it in the age of technology that we're in.
Yes,
So we can reach out to one another and not be, even if we're physically isolated right now, we don't have to be socially isolated.
yes,
And we do have
exactly.
people to contact. So again, I thank you so much for coming on
You're
and
welcome.
for sharing your story. And um, I hope you nothing but the better of health in 2021,
Thank you.
less injections, and uh, tighter blood sugar control and a lovely transplant.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Phunky Diabetic Podcast. Tune into future episodes by logging on to phunkydiabeticpodcast.com, and that's funky with a PH. On the website, you'll find links to follow the podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and can submit questions, comments, and suggestions for future topics. You'll also find links on the website that will enable you to listen to, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Remember, none of the opinions expressed in this episode should be construed as medical or legal advice. Please consult a medical professional before making any change to your diet or diabetic healthcare regimen. I hope you'll be well, stay safe, and keep listening to the Phunky Diabetic Podcast.